I'd like to introduce our next speaker this morning, Mr. Edmund Ainscough, Managing Director of Lunnon Metals Limited. Edmund has over 35 years' experience in the resource industry. He arrived in Australia in 1987, heading straight to Kambalda, where he spent 12 months in Western Mining Corporation's underground Victory Gold Mine before heading to Zambia to work underground in copper, followed by tin in Cornwall and a stint exploring for gold on the west coast of New Zealand. Returning to Kambalda in 1994, Edmund says he sometimes feels like he has been here ever since. He was the last chief geologist for Western Mining at St Ives and the first for Goldfields when they bought the mine in 2001, which is when, Edmund says, the seeds of the Lunnon Metals story were sown. Edmund stayed with Goldfields until 2008 before a 3-year spell in private advisory. In 2013, he co-founded the private vehicle that ultimately became Lunnon Metals, and here he is 10 minutes later to tell us about that journey. Thanks very much, Edmund.
Thanks, Reg. Thanks to the Diggers and Dealers organisers. I had the privilege of following Dale and Pilbara Minerals' amazing success story last year on a very windy Wednesday afternoon. Very pleased to be back, to be invited back, also to be moved along with Pilbara Minerals to Monday morning. It's a far more auspicious spot. Great to be talking to a full auditorium. I just need to convince Dale I'm not stalking him, I'm not following him around looking for a lazy dividend cheque to fall out of his back pocket. This has been lodged. Read it at your leisure. There's some abbreviations you might want to check on the lodged version on the ASX. So, look, we saw the amazing story of lithium. I'm here to tell you about a successful story in nickel. I want to tell you about the things that set Lunnon Metals apart from its peers, and that's nickel sulfides, high-grade nickel sulfides. There'll be a focus on Kambalda in the next 10 minutes or so, and the discovery opportunity that Kambalda really affords Lunnon Metals. It's kind of unique. And the other thing we think is unique about Lunnon Metals, which I'll touch on at the end of the talk, is what we call the sprint capacity, our ability to move from being an explorer to an aspiring producer very, very quickly, because the capital is so modest, and we'll touch on that at the end. But I'd also like to pose a question and potentially answer it during the 10 or so minutes, that after 57 years and 1.6 million tonnes of nickel metal, is the best still to be found? Does Kambalda have the potential to deliver one or more significant further discoveries? We think it does, and hopefully I'll convince you of that in the coming presentation. So it's been a big year since I presented this time last year. A little bit over a year before that year, we've seen, from our perspective, an emerging recognition of the strategic value of nickel sulfides, not just nickel sulfides in mineral resource in the ground, but also, maybe just as importantly, tenure that has the ability to deliver future discoveries of nickel sulfides. And in that regard, we've seen big companies with deep pockets acquire Western Areas, Oz Minerals, and most recently Mincor. And in respect to that last transaction, that acquisition of Mincor certainly put the spotlight on Kambalda and put the spotlight on nickel. And in that regard, Lunnon Metals is blessed to have just under 50 square kilometres right in the heart of Kambalda. And we have established a resource base of just under 88,000 tonnes of nickel metal. And we think the potential to find a lot more. So we're going to zoom into that cluster of dots, which is in the eastern goldfields around Kalgoorlie, Kambalda, the birthplace of the nickel business in Australia. And that last transaction, where Wyloo acquiring Mincor, we've had a lot of inbound communication. We've had the opportunity to talk to our existing shareholders and potential future shareholders just about our assets. We have 2 green polygons on that image. The southern project, Foster Baker, was the project we listed on. The northern project in the heart of Kambalda is the rights we acquired from Goldfields, which settled in October last year. And during those communications, those conversations with our shareholders, we're at pains to point out that our assets are in Kambalda. Kambalda and Widgiemooltha are 2 separate belts. Geographically, they're quite distinct, obviously laid down at the same time, geologically very similar in a lot of their characteristics, but Kambalda is renowned for having very high grade. At a mining cut-off, the grade is high 2s, low 3s. In fact, historically, over all that metal that's been mined in Kambalda, the grade is still well above 3%. It produces a high-quality concentrate, rich in copper and cobalt byproduct credits, and importantly, low in deleterious elements, topically arsenic, and it has other beneficial ratios such as iron MgO, important for the smelter in Kalgoorlie. And with the removal of Mincor from the ASX, Lunnon Metals now is really the only avenue for investors to get exposure to discovery and development in that Kambalda belt. Not Kambalda style, not Kambalda district, actually in that Kambalda belt, Lunnon Metals is your only exposure. And remember, Kambalda is Australia's most prolific nickel belt. So we're going to zoom into that northern project in the heart of Kambalda. There's a little bit of geology on this slide. The red outline is the contact between the basalt and the komatiite. All the nickel that's ever been found in the Kambalda region is at or very close to that contact. The grey shaded area is our mineral rights on Goldfields tenements that we acquired last year. And I'd like to highlight, this is the land of the giant. The big 4 nickel mines in Kambalda's history all hug that contact. Ottajuan, 300,000 tonnes plus. Longshaft, 220,000 tonnes. Silver Lake on our property, 123,000 tonnes. And Durkin rounds out the top 4 at 100,000 nickel tonnes. That northern side of the dome, as it's called, all sits now in Wailu's ownership. The southern half principally sits inside Lunnon Metals' tenure. And there's an enormous production gap between the northern half, which has been mined continuously for the best part of 50 years, and the southern half. Some 600,000 tonnes or thereabouts is the difference between the area that was continuously mined and the area that now sits inside Lunnon Metals, which effectively shut early, were the earliest mines to shut well before WMC exited Kambalda. Importantly, then it sat dormant inside Goldfields for another 20 years until we acquired it last year. A significant gap. We don't believe that gap's real. There's no geological reason for that gap between the north and the south to be present. And I'd like to now focus on that long south gap area on the right-hand side of that image, labelled in white. We think that's a significant opportunity. So you're looking at a perspective view. This is a 3-dimensional view. You're looking from the southeast back to the northwest of that Kambalda dome. Our mineral rights are draped over that 3-dimensional image, and that's that basalt contact again, where all the nickel is typically hosted. Kambalda is famous for its incredibly long channels, very long plunge extents, and that gap, roughly 3 kilometres by 2 kilometres, is down plunge of one of Kambalda's great mines, Longshaft. Over 340,000 tonnes of nickel came out of the various channels that were accessed through Longshaft and Victor Decline. That says a lot of metal. Those chutes, those channels all plunge towards that area. And unbelievably, I've also shown the drilling here. There's 260 kilometres of diamond drilling drilled by WMC at Fisher and Silver Lake. Not one hole tests that contact in that 3 by 2 kilometre gap. Hard to believe, untested in Australia's most prolific nickel belt. So we've set about exploring that region. If you're in any doubt about the plunge extent of these channels, I've drawn on here, I've removed the drilling and drawn on the Silver Lake and the East Alpha channel, which are one and the same thing, with slightly offset by a post-nickel fault. That channel runs for 4 to 5 kilometres. So there is no reason why those highly endowed channels coming off Wailu's ground to the north don't plunge to the south onto our ground. We did a 2D seismic line. We announced it in April. And the geophysicists are telling us that they've picked up a signature that they believe is a channel. Doesn't necessarily mean there's nickel in it. We need to drill it. We're keen to drill it. I was hoping to have drilled it by diggers, but it's taken a bit longer to going than we hoped. But we will drill it. This is a fabulously endowed area, and that seismic line has defined what we think is a high priority walk-up target. We're accessing a lake rig, and we'll drill that as soon as possible. So we think there's something big still to be found in Kambalda. We're pretty simple folk. If you're looking for something big, probably think it's much more likely to be an area that hasn't been drilled than an area that has been drilled. And we're not the only people who think there's something big. Wailu, Mincor before them, and Wailu have done some amazing technical work that came out just as the transaction with Wailu was hitting the ground back in March and April. And Wailu have been quite public since the acquisition to say they also think there's a lot more nickel to be found in Kambalda, and just as importantly, that maybe the main ore body still is yet to be discovered. We agree with them. And one of the reasons we are confident is shown in this chart. This has got 3 pairs of bubbles. These are the assets that the 3 junior companies at the time, Mincor, Panoramic and Independence, bought from WMC back in the late 90s, early 2000s. The smaller bubble is all the nickel that's is all the nickel that was mined to the point of sale by WMC, and the larger bubble is all the nickel mined at those assets to date. 440,000 tonnes of nickel metal was mined after WMC exited the region. The belt, the Kambalda belt, has an amazing ability to keep yielding discoveries. So we think there's something big, other people think there's something big, and we've got the confidence of Kambalda's history to back us up. And just remember, our assets got sold with the gold to Goldfields and sat dormant inside that gold major for the best part of 20 years. So that's looking forward. That's what we think might still be there. We've had a busy 2 years since we listed in June 2021. We've hopped to the south side of Lake Lefroy. This is our Foster Baker project that we listed on. When we listed, we had 39,000 nickel tonnes. We've grown that by just under 50,000 nickel tonnes. We've been extremely aggressive with the drill rig, drilled over 60 kilometres. In our prospectus, we said we'd drilled 28 kilometres. The reason for that outperformance has been the discovery of Baker, and Baker sits on the right-hand side of that image. Again, this is that basalt contact with the komatiite stripped away, showing the location of our mineral resources. Baker's just under 1 million tonnes, at just under 31,000 nickel tonnes at very good grade. And to the left of that image, on the other side of the fold, are our Foster resources. They total 57,000 nickel tonnes at just under 3%. So all in all, close to 3 million tonnes, still at very good grade, very typical Kambalda grade. And in parallel to that aggressive drill program, we've been just as aggressive de-risking our assets. We've been quite public, disclosing all of our studies, our metallurgical, our geotechnical data. In May, we put out a PFS on Baker. This area, the subject of that PFS, is that black square on the right-hand image. We'll zoom in on that in a moment. But all of our assets, all of our tenements, all of our rights are on existing mining leases, which means the hurdle to move from an explorer through a developer to a producer, the regulatory hurdles are minimal. We've done the study work at Baker. We're now rolling that study work out to Foster to look at whether we do Foster with Baker or Foster after Baker. But we've been very methodical. We're ticking all the boxes, notwithstanding that the majority of the management team lived and worked in Kambalda. We haven't assumed anything. We're collecting the data and we're ticking the boxes we need to tick to de-risk our assets. So we're going to zoom in on Baker, and that black box is the same black box. And Baker, we think, presents this unique sprint capacity. Baker has some pretty amazing attributes, considering it sat there undiscovered for the best part of 60 years. It starts 70 metres down. The indicated resource, which was 24,000 tonnes at 3.8, is encapsulated by that black box. That bottoms out at just 200 metres down. So it's shallow. Not only is it shallow, it's extremely close to an existing gold open pit, in fact only 450 metres from that pit. So those in the audience who've worked underground will know that to get from the edge of that pit to the top of the ore body, we're talking weeks and months, not years. And the capital hurdle, as a result, to put this into production is extremely low, and less than 20 million, and hence the payback is really quick. Two numbers I'd like you to pay notice to. On the right-hand side, the free cash flow before tax, $196 million. The NPV before tax, $164 million. And those numbers resonate with the team because on Friday we closed at $1. We've got 196 million shares on issue. That makes the maths pretty easy for a simple geologist like me. Our market cap is pretty well the same as the free cash flow, just from that small black box, and remove our cash, which is a healthy 19 or so million dollars. Our NPV pretty well replicates our enterprise value. So notwithstanding, we've looked at the strategic value of nickel in WA. We've looked at the M&A aspects of people wanting to put their foot on ownership of nickel sulfides. The amazing discovery opportunity that sits around Kambalda. We've zoomed right into a really tiny subset of our mineral resource, and it already covers the value of the company. All of those assets are open. The future at Baker is really bright, and the future for discovery, we think, is pretty significant. So wrapping up, it's been an amazing time to be in nickel. Lithium's been successful. Nickel's had some headwinds of late, but nickel will have its day. It is an important critical metal. We're in an amazing district. We've got 4 historical mines that missed the last boom, been really aggressive, and I think we've been rewarded for being aggressive with the discovery of Baker. We've doubled our mineral resource in less than 2 years, and we've doubled our footprint in Kambalda. Kambalda's a great place to do business. Kambalda, Kalgoorlie. I've seen James trail around. Shout out to the Shire of Coolgardie. They've been really supportive. We're getting on really well with the Naju, who are traditional owners for Foster and Baker in the Lake Lefroy area, and we're close to finalising an agreement with them. It's a significantly well-endowed area in terms of infrastructure, so the capital is extremely low, and to move from being an explorer to an aspiring producer is pretty straightforward. But without a doubt, the value that underpins Lunnon Metals is its address in Kambalda. It is still a globally significant source of nickel sulfides. We've seen that with the M&A transactions that are happening around us. It still delivers a premium product that's superior to anything else in the district, and it has this amazing and unrivaled record of discovery. So we're blessed to have the future look bright after 57 years, and all that metal, we still think there's a lot to be found. Kambalda's still going strong. Thank you for your time, and if you have any further questions, please do come and see us at booth 52. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, but thanks, Edmund.